Hey there. Tonight, we travel far north to a land where silence is not peace, but endurance, where the air freezes before it reaches your lungs, and the forests stretch endlessly beneath the pale northern sky. This is Finland, a country small in size but vast in spirit, where survival itself has always been a kind of defiance. Only a year ago, you might have thought the fighting was over. The Winter War had ended a brief, brutal conflict between Finland and the Soviet Union. The snow had turned red that winter, yet the Finns, outnumbered and outgunned, managed the impossible. They kept their independence. They lost land. Yes, great forests, towns, entire lakes swallowed by the Soviet border, but they remained free. For a moment, the guns went quiet, and the North returned to its heavy silence. But silence, in these woods, rarely lasts long. It's now the summer of 1941. To the east, the Soviet Union gathers its strength once more. To the west, Germany marches across Europe like a steel tide. When Hitler's armies strike deep into Soviet territory, the Finns face a choice that is anything but simple. You are one of them, a soldier, perhaps, or just a villager who has already buried friends from the last war. The bitterness hasn't faded. The memory of burned homes and frozen comrades still clings to your heart like frost. So when word spreads that Germany is at war with Russia, something stirs in you, a dangerous hope. Maybe, just maybe, this is the moment to reclaim what was stolen, to return to Karelia, the homeland lost in that bitter peace treaty. The thought burns quietly, like a hidden ember under snow. The government calls it the continuation war. For many Finns, it feels like revenge. But for others, it's simply survival, the kind that demands hard choices and cold hearts. You know the odds. The Soviet Union is vast, relentless, and unyielding. But Finland, small and scarred as it is, knows how to fight in the cold, knows how to vanish into the trees, knows that endurance can be its own kind of victory. The air grows sharp again. Frost settles on the pines, and the lakes freeze into mirrors. Somewhere in the distance, artillery thunders across the Karelian Isthmus. You pull your wool collar high against the wind, clutch your rifle, and listen. The forest holds its breath with you. Before the first shot, there is always stillness, that strange, ghostly calm, when even the birds refuse to sing. The world seems frozen in anticipation. Then, beneath the pale northern sun, winter's fires will begin to burn again. You move with the column at dawn. The forest breathes mist, and every branch glitters with dew. German trucks rumble past on the dirt road, engines coughing smoke that hangs in the cold air. Their officers shout orders in a language you barely understand. For them, this is strategy, a northern flank in a grand campaign. For you, it is something quieter and heavier. Each step northward is a return, not a conquest. Karelia lies ahead, the lakes, the birch groves, the houses you remember only through stories and photographs. The men march without singing. Revenge, perhaps, is too private for song. The road winds deeper into the forest, the air thick with resin and the faint metallic scent of gun oil. You pass through villages, long abandoned roofs caved in, wells frozen, the silence of things left behind. A child's toy half buried in the mud, a broken sled, a door swinging on a single hinge. You don't stop. No one does. The Germans march ahead with their machines and confidence, their tanks leaving deep scars in the earth. They wave occasionally, offering cigarettes or canned meat, and you nod politely but take nothing. You've learned that everything offered in war carries a cost. By afternoon, the light fades into that strange northern dusk, not darkness, but a dull, endless gray. The forest swallows sound, and even your footsteps seem too loud. Somewhere, a woodpecker taps against bark, the only rhythm in the stillness. When the first snow begins to fall, it feels almost merciful. The flakes settle gently on your helmet, on the barrels of rifles, on the black road ahead. For a moment, it almost looks peaceful until the silence breaks with the distant boom of artillery. You freeze. The sound rolls over the trees like thunder. Then another, closer this time. The column halts. Someone whispers that the Soviets are shelling the river crossing up ahead. The Germans rush forward, shouting orders, while your unit scatters into the tree line. You crouch beneath a pine, breath sharp in your throat, watching smoke rise through the branches. The snow that had seemed soft a moment ago now glows orange in the firelight. And then you realize the war you thought you'd return to has already found you again. The frost bites deeper. The ground trembles. And as the shells echo across the forest, you grip your rifle and whisper the only thing you can: not again. The shelling fades as suddenly as it began, leaving only the ringing in your ears and the soft hiss of snow settling on smoldering wood. Smoke drifts low through the trees, carrying the bitter smell of burnt pine and iron. You rise slowly, your knees stiff, your breath visible in the frigid air. Around you, men emerge one by one, faces gray, eyes wide, shoulders hunched as if trying to fold into the forest itself. No one speaks for a long time. Words feel unnecessary now. A medic passes by with a stretcher made from branches and torn canvas. On it lies what used to be a man, wrapped so tightly in blankets that he seems already part of the winter ground. You watch him pass, then lower your gaze. Far ahead, a German tank still burns where the shell had struck. The snow around it melts into black water, hissing as it cools. A crow lands on the barrel, bold and patient, waiting for silence to mean safety. You walk again, slower this time, the rhythm of war settling into your bones. Each step feels heavier than the last. You no longer think of Karelia or maps. You think of warmth, of home, of something simple like bread or laughter. But those are far away now, buried beneath the snow with the last season's dead. The officers shout for the men to keep moving, and you obey. That is what soldiers do. They move forward, even when there's nowhere left to go but deeper into the cold. As the column stretches out along the narrow road, night finally descends, pale, endless, and quiet. The stars blink faintly through the smoke, and for a moment, you could almost believe the world itself is holding its breath, waiting to see who will survive the dawn. That night, the column stops near a frozen river, where the trees bend low under the weight of snow. The officers decide to make camp. No tents, no fires, the smoke would give you away. Only the faint glow of cigarettes flickering in cupped hands, like dying stars between the trunks. You scrape a shallow hollow in the snow and lower yourself into it, wrapping your greatcoat tight. The ground steals your warmth faster than sleep can find you. Someone passes a tin of black bread and salted fish down the line. You take a bite, chew slowly. The bread tastes of iron and cold, the fish like memory. Around you, men murmur quietly in Finnish, Swedish, German, different tongues bound together by exhaustion. The sound drifts like wind through the pines. Above, the aurora begins to stir. It moves faintly at first, a pale green shimmer behind the clouds, like breath rising from the world itself. You tilt your head back, watching it shift and ripple, a curtain of light waving across the darkness. It feels almost holy. Some of the younger men whisper prayers. Others just stare. The forest creaks in the cold. Somewhere nearby, ice cracks on the river with a sound like distant thunder. You close your eyes and imagine the faces of those waiting back home. Your mother tending the stove. Your father staring at the empty chair where you used to sit. You picture the house, the smell of rye bread, the sound of thawing snow dripping from the eaves. For a moment, the war feels far away. Only the wind remains, moving softly through the branches, a lullaby sung in a language older than any nation. You breathe it in, and for the first time in weeks, you almost feel human again. Then a flare rises somewhere to the east, white and sharp against the sky. The moment is gone. You grip your rifle, heart steady, breath slow. The aurora fades behind the smoke, and the night closes around you once more. Around the campfire that night, no one speaks of glory. A German officer unrolls his maps, tracing lines that cut across your homeland like scars. You watch, wondering whose war this truly is. Some say Finland fights to reclaim what was lost. Others whisper that you've become a pawn, fighting beneath a foreign flag that once promised order but now smells of something colder. You stare into the flames and see the faces of those left behind. You wonder if justice can survive when every ally has a different truth. The officer's gloved finger slides from river to road to ridgeline, a neat geometry that turns lakes into obstacles and villages into objectives. His voice is clipped, certain, the kind of certainty that makes men nod even when their stomachs are not convinced. He taps the edge of Karelia with a nail that clicks like a beetle on varnished wood. You feel something tighten behind the ribs, not fear, exactly, but a tug, like an old stitch reopening. Someone feeds the fire with a careful handful of twigs. The glow lifts and falls along faces, young, old, newly shaved or frost-burned, eyes red from smoke and sleepless miles. You catch fragments of talk from the shadows, the price of potatoes last autumn, a cousin drafted, a neighbor who didn't come home from the winter war. No one argues, not openly. Arguments waste heat. The questions stay under the tongue with the taste of ash. The German officer offers cigarettes. A few men take them. You shake your head. The last cigarette shared with a stranger was in a village that no longer exists. The smoke still there in memory even after the chimneys stop breathing. The officer moves on, satisfied. He has shown the map. He has shown the plan. He has shown that the lines, once traced, will become roads under boots and steel. When he's gone, the map remains in your mind, superimposed on the land you knew from childhood stories, the lake with the crooked birch on its shore, the field where rye grew tall enough to hide a boy, the lane where snow creaked in January under horses' hooves. A war can fit inside a sheet of paper. A home never can. Across the fire, Juka sits with his collar up, cap low, hands extended to the heat without hope it will last. He's older than you, older than most here, the sort of man who was already tired before the first trumpet sounded. He carries a folded photograph in his pocket and a dented spoon in his pack, and nothing else that can't be lost. "You think we'll see the old borders?" he asks quietly, not looking at you. "Borders move," you say, "more to the flames than to him." "So do rivers," he replies. But the fish remember where they were born. The wind lifts, pushes smoke into your eyes. Tears prick, uninvited. Somewhere on the edge of camp, an engine coughs to life. Sputters, dies, coughs again. Laughter follows brief, like breath on glass. There's a little relief any time a machine proves itself mortal. Later, the officer returns with a tin mug of something that pretends to be coffee. He squats beside the fire, coat creaking, face a pale wedge in the dark. "We advance at dawn," he says, softer now, as if confiding rather than commanding. "Your unit holds the tree line while our armor crosses the clearing. Speed is everything." He waits, as though a blessing might be given. You nod once. It is all the blessing he will receive. He stands, and for a heartbeat, you see him not as an officer, but as a man in a heavy coat, far from home. His certainty a tool he learned, to protect himself from the same cold that gnaws your bones. Compassion startles, almost unwelcome. Then he is a shape among trees again, swallowed by the camp's slow drift into silence. Sleep doesn't come. The questions keep walking circles in the snow. If this is justice, why does it borrow another man's uniform? If this is survival, why does the price feel so ready to be paid with other people's hands? You turn the words over until they are smooth with handling, and still they cut. A chaplain stops by the fire, the wool of his coat already rimed with frost. He doesn't preach no one has patience for sermons that won't boil water. He asks if anyone wants letters written, names remembered, anything set aside against a day when voices might be needed in rooms where no one else has the right to speak. 2 men give him names. One gives him a ring. You give him nothing. The promises in your head are private, and no priest, no matter how kind, can carry them for you. Dawn approaches the way it always does here, not with color, but with a thinning of the dark. The sky becomes less black, the trees less idea and more branch, the snow less thought and more weight. Boots thud, straps cinch, rifles click. You blow on your fingers before sealing them into stiff gloves. Then, check the bolt again. Habit has replaced belief. Habit will have to do. The lieutenant whispers orders. The men nod. The line forms. You move out. The forest receiving you without remark. It was here before wars, and if ice and root have their say, it will be here after, not unchanged, but unpersuaded. The clearing appears suddenly, as clearings do, a raw rectangle clawed out of trees. Stiff grass frozen flat, a scatter of stumps where trunks once met sky. The German tanks wait at its edge, exhaust ghosting around them, metal damp to a dull, watchful silence. A hand signal, and your squad melts along the timberline, each man choosing a tree as if choosing a partner in a dance that no one enjoys. Across the clearing, the first Soviet shells begin to stitch the earth. You taste dirt before the sound reaches you. The line holds. The tanks lurch forward, heavy and determined, and the clearing answers with smoke. The plan on the officer's map becomes a sequence of sounds. The high crack of rifles, the lower thump of grenades, the long tearing rip of machine guns, the sudden shout when something unexpected peels the world open. You fire, reload, fire again. The shoulder complains, the glove slips, the breath fogs the sight. Men shout in Finnish on your left, in German on your right, and farther out, voices you can't place call to each other in a cadence more sea than forest. War throws languages into a pot. and stirs. Afterward, no tongue tastes the same. At your tree's root, the ground jerks. A shell has landed somewhere behind, shoving air through the trunks. Snow drifts down like ash. For a moment, nothing moves. Then time resumes with a rush, and a runner appears, a boy with a strip of white cloth tied around his arm and mud to his knees. He drops beside you, breath in needles, words in pieces. Shift left. The armor's bogged. Hold until engineers clear the track. You nod, wave the signal, push through the underbrush to a new angle where the clearing narrows like a funnel. There, a Soviet machine gun nest tucked behind a hummock, muzzle flashing with the regularity of a cruel metronome. 3 of you trade glances, then the quiet agreement that passes for courage. 1 suppress, 2 flank. You go wide, feel branches whip your face. Feel the old knee ache from a winter you can still smell. The nest turns, hungry. Snow spits into your eyes. The distance closes like a mouth. You throw the grenade arcs. Time stretches so thin, it becomes a soundless string across an empty sky. And then the dull bloom, the sudden quiet, the way silence returns not as peace, but as weight. After you lie there panting, cheek to ice, and the forest presses cold into your skin as if to remind you who owns this ground. When you lift your head, the clearing is changed again. Tanks inching free, engineers like beetles around their ankles, men moving bundles of timber as if building a bridge to some place where maps end. The fighting ebbs by noon. Not victory, not defeat, the day has simply run out of certain things to spend. You eat where you squat, bread gone stone hard, cheese that remembers a summer it did not live to see. A German soldier offers you a swallow from a flask. You accept for once. The liquid burns, carves a path to the chest, sets a small fire there that dies quickly but leaves a glow. He points toward the east with his chin. We push tomorrow, he says in careful, schoolroom Finnish. And then, in German, he adds something softer that you don't understand, except in the way a face leans when it speaks of home. You nod. The nod becomes for both of you enough. When the order comes to move, you shoulder the pack and the rifle that has begun to feel like a long, unhappy limb you can't quite learn to love. The column threads deeper between spruce and birch. The forest narrows, then opens into a low valley where a stream once ran. Now it lies under ice, like a vein under pale skin, clouded and slow. A thin bridge of felled logs crosses it, scabbed with frost. Everyone steps lightly. The ice speaks, a voice like a violin string tuned too tight. On the far side, signs of habitation begin to return. A fence post chewed by horses, a rowan tree with a tattered blue ribbon tied to a branch, a barn without a roof. Your stomach ticks at the presence of human things. The questions, which had been quiet out of respect for danger, begin again. If this is liberation, where are the people who asked for it? If this is restitution, how do you give back what winter has already taken? The first villagers appear all at once, as if unrolled from a curtain of trees. A woman with a scarf pulled low on her brow, a man missing 2 fingers from a hand that still grips a shovel, a child with eyes like puddles right before the freeze. They stand, not in welcome, not in fear, just standing, as if waiting to learn what kind of story this will be when told later by a mouth with all its teeth. You lower your rifle. The woman steps forward and says the name of a town you know, though the vowels sit heavy on her tongue. The way Karelian speech always makes words sound older than they are. She asks if the fighting is over. No one answers. To answer would be to lie or to prophesy, and soldiers are too tired for either. A boy brings a pail of water. You drink from a tin cup that still smells faintly of milk. The cold presses through the metal until your teeth sing. In the yard, a dog with one ear watches the squad pass and decides against barking. Even the animals have learned to conserve noise. This is the part no map shows. How to move like a liberator in a village that has learned all soldiers want something, even the polite ones. How to trade without taking. How to ask without ordering. Your lieutenant speaks to the old man by the broken fence with the careful grammar of someone who knows the shape of apology. The old man nods. The shovel stays in his hand. Between them lies a winter large enough to require 2 languages to cross. You post a watch by the road, curl on a plank in a shed that smells of hay and rust, and let the bones decide which aches can be set aside until morning. Sleep comes in shallow waves, never deep enough to drown in, always just enough to remind the body what it misses. Sometime in the night, snow begins to fall again, the heavy kind that settles into corners and remakes rooftops into the backs of sleeping animals. You stand a watch before dawn, counting heartbeats, counting breaths, counting the trees across the lane as if each were a rosary bead. The sky lifts from black to charcoal to an iron that refuses polish. Crows map their day in black angles above the grove. By the time relief arrives, your eyelids feel lined with grit, and your feet have forgotten warmth as a concept. The march resumes. The questions come along because they have no feet to tire. You meet refugees moving west, men pulling sledges, women carrying bundles that must weigh less than memory. You step aside. They step aside. Politeness survives like lichen on stone, not beautiful, but stubborn. At midday, you halt at a crossroads where a finger post lists places that were once distances and are now warnings. Here the unit gathers, not to rest, but to rearrange. 2 squads to the ridge, 1 to the logging track, 1 to escort the engineers. Your squad is held in reserve. The word reserve tastes like a joke inside a devout man's prayer. Nothing is reserved in winter. Everything is spent. The German officer returns with a new map. Corners curled, edges damp. He mentions a timetable, another unit, a favorable movement of supply. He says the word inevitable, and it hangs in the air like a lantern without a hook. When he leaves, the map again remains on the inside of your eyelids, and again the names are rivers, not orders. You rub the bridge of your nose and realize dirt has found residence in every line of your palm. One day, you think, a day that exists beyond imagination, water will run clear over these hands, in a basin that belongs to no army. For a moment, the idea warms you more than the tea. Juka returns from the edge of the woods. With a branch, he insists, will make the fire behave, as if it owes him a debt. He sits, breathes on his hands, and says, "My aunt used to say the forest forgives only the honest." He pokes the coals as if they were a suspect. You think we're honest here? Honesty feels like a luxury even bread cannot buy. We're cold, you say finally. Maybe that's close. He grunts, not in agreement, not in dissent. In this war, the difference between the two is a thinner line than the mapmaker's pen can draw. As afternoon dims toward the hushed color that pretends not to be evening, scouts return. The Soviets have dug in along the next ridge wire, pits, an arrangement of earth that suggests patience. The lieutenant nods as if receiving a weather report he cannot change. He lays the plan on the snow, uses a knife tip to mark routes. Everyone leans in. The snow takes impressions quickly and holds them just long enough to become responsibilities. Before moving out, the chaplain passes again, a small bundle of folded paper in his satchel. He doesn't speak. He is an archive in boots. Someone asks him for a hymn, and he obliges with the one about the river that makes glad the city of God. You don't sing. The melody lives behind the ribs where the questions have set up their winter quarters. Up the ridge then, belly to earth, elbows freezing through cloth, packs catching on roots, breath measured in miserly sips to avoid smoke from your own mouth. The wire appears like a thought half-admitted, silvered with rhyme. The men with cutters move, their hands clumsy in gloves, their lives balanced on the small hinge of a quiet minute. Farther down the line, a flare pops. The forest inhales. The ridge explodes in instruction. You don't remember much of that hour later. That is not to say you forget. You carry the weight of it the way you carry the rifle, awkwardly without wishing to, close enough that separation would feel like the loss of a limb you never asked to grow. What remains clear is small, the way snow puffed from a branch with each shot, the way a man's breath sounded like a bellows when fear compressed his lungs, the way a hand found your shoulder in the smoke, not to pull you back, not to push you forward, just to say I am still here without spending words. When the ridge settles, it does not surrender. It merely pauses. You hold what you hold. They hold what they hold. Between, the forest keeps its counsel with the discretion of an old judge. Night takes the witness stand. Everyone promises to return tomorrow with better arguments. Only then, in the small amnesty that follows the day's sentences, does the second thought creep back, the one that began by the campfire when the officer's nail traced your home like a wound. Justice. Is this it? The question no longer feels like a blade. It feels like a stone. You turn it in the pocket of the mind, thumb the edges smooth. The stone is not your enemy. The stone keeps you honest. You picture the woman with the scarf by the broken fence, the boy with the water pail, the dog that decided against barking. You picture, too, the Russian faces you could barely see behind the nest. You silenced a shape, a shout, a life arranged to mirror yours, facing west when you face east. You want to hate. Hate would be warm. Instead, you end up with something colder and heavier: recognition. Perhaps the way a mirror continues to reflect even when the room goes dark. The lieutenant passes quietly behind the line, touching shoulders. Good work. Hold here. Don't waste matches. Wait for the word. His hand reaches you, presses once, leaves. The pressure remains like a stamp in wax. He is not a man given to speeches. You prefer him that way. Speeches require belief. Hands require presence. Stars arrive without ceremony. In the east, a thin wind begins to test the seams of your coat. You tuck your chin into the collar and rest your cheek against bark that has seen more winters than all your mothers combined. The war might be fought for borders, for lines on paper and pride in Parliament, for sacks of flour and barrels of fuel. Here tonight it is fought for inches of warmth and the right to open your eyes again when snow takes the shape of dawn. And still, the quiet debate continues. Under everything else, polite and relentless. A pawn, some said. A partner, others insisted. Both may be true. You find yourself returning to a simpler phrasing. You are a man with a duty and a direction. Duty can be questioned. Direction can be changed. But tonight, both are a north arrow frozen in a compass that cannot lie. The needle knows. Whether the map deserves such truth is a matter for rooms where men stand near stoves. You promise yourself a small oath, one not listed on any proclamation. Wherever the line moves tomorrow, whatever flag flaps in a wind it did not grow, you will step as lightly as a man carrying other people's bread. You will remember that the forest is not yours, that the road belongs to those who must walk it after you, that the water in the pail will be colder for the boy if your boots split the ice he draws it from. You will do harm because war is harm, but you will not do more than your orders demand. If justice survives in winter, perhaps it survives like that, not in speeches, but in the careful way a door is closed at night, so heat does not flee the only room that has any. Somewhere far behind, a train cries a long, lonely sound that turns rails into a string pulled across the whole spine of the land. Supplies, men, news, maybe a letter that will arrive at a house where someone has already learned to stop listening for footsteps. You let the sound go through you and leave you upright. It moves on, looking for stations that can still offer light. Near midnight, Juka leans close and says, "When this is done, I will grow potatoes so large they will frighten the priest." It is the sort of declaration only exhaustion can afford. You agree without smiling. The picture helps. Potatoes enormous and gentle, pulled from a ground that has relearned kindness. Do you think God watches all this? He asks. God listens, you say. To what? To the way we say each other's names. He thinks about that long enough to make it respectable. Then he pulls the blanket higher and returns to that shallow drift of sleep the body tolerates when it can't negotiate for more. You remain awake a while longer, holding the ridge with your eyes, holding your own name in your mouth like a coin saved against leaner days. The question's quiet, if not resolved. A decision arrives that is not the kind officers give. To endure the next cold minute, to keep the rifle clean, to share what can be shared, to refuse what corrodes from the inside. Call it sisu. Call it a habit that outlives the reasons for it. Call it you, still here. When dawn edges the trunks with a color that almost deserves a name, the word passes down the line. Stand to. You rise, joints protesting, breath making a small cloud that a child would laugh at. The ridge waits, the clearing waits, the map somewhere in a pocket waits for a day when it will be replaced by another map, drawn with just enough hope to justify new lines. You check the bolt, pat the pocket where the stone of your question lives, and face the sound that can only be the first artillery of morning. Whatever this war is called in rooms of wood and velvet, here it is simply begun again. You lift your eyes once to the black threads of crows, to the pale suggestion of sun, and then lower them to the path a boot can trust. There is work to do, and until someone with a warmer hand than winter's removes the duty from your shoulders, you will do it, not because glory waits at the end, but because the men on either side of you must not be left alone in the snow. The pines rise around you like a cathedral of shadow. The snow muffles every sound. Even the ravens seem reluctant to speak. Here the forest hides you from planes and shells, but it also tests you. It demands strength, patience, silence. Your boots sink deep into moss and frost. You move in single file, rifle tight against your chest, every sense sharpened. The forest gives shelter, but it takes warmth. It offers cover, but it steals light. You begin to understand that survival here is not victory, it's endurance. You learn the grammar of trees, the way an old pine leans announces the prevailing wind. The knots in its trunk count years, the way a priest counts prayers. Lichen thick on the north side is a compass you can read with your fingertips. You feel the language of snow, too crust, that bears your weight like a promise. Powder that swallows you to the knee. Wind-packed drifts that hiss when a ski slides wrong. The forest is a teacher, with few words and many tests, and it grades on a curve that never bends. Your breath becomes a metronome, in for 4 steps, out for 4 steps, each exhale a white ribbon that the cold pulls straight. You place your skis carefully, edge to edge, the leather bindings creaking like quiet door hinges. The line ahead is a row of shoulders and rucksacks, moving at the pace of calculation. Not so fast the sweat will soak you. Not so slow the blood will lose interest in your fingers. Someone behind you hums a bar of a folk tune under his scarf and stops, embarrassed. As if the forest might mark the singer on a map. The forest marks everything. You pass the white slumped backs of boulders, the half-buried ribs of old stumps, a fox track stitched like neat handwork across a frozen ditch. Once, between 2 birches, you catch the figure of an elk standing impossibly still, steam rising from its nostrils as though the animal were another kind of stove. It watches you the way a judge watches a defendant who already knows the verdict, then turns and melts into the trees with a grace the war cannot touch. You envy it shamelessly and move on. Midday has no heat. The light is clean and indifferent, a surgeon that refuses small talk. Your fingers begin to complain the ache under the nails, the spark when they brush metal. You know to keep the mittens over the gloves, to flex wrists inside the sleeves, to tighten and loosen the boots before numbness becomes decision. You know to sip, not gulp, the tea gone lukewarm in the bottle under your coat. You know to eat when told, even if the stomach answers the command with silence. A square of rye hard as an oath, a curl of salted fish that tastes of a summer you barely remember, a lump of sugar that makes your mouth remember childhood for exactly 3 seconds. The forest takes its cut for everything it gives. At a rise where the pines thin, the lieutenant raises his hand. The line slides to a stop, men grouping into the shape of listening. He kneels and traces with a glove a picture on the snow. A logging track, a bend, a low hill, a suspected post where the Red Army has set an ear to the ground. He marks a modi with his knuckle, a pocket to be cut from the larger coat of the front and stitched shut with wire and cold. The plan is simple because the forest demands simplicity. Ghosts up the flank, a feint at the road, a quiet closing of the hand. You go left, angling through spruce that snag and scold. A branch snaps against your cheek with the clean insult of a slap. You accept it. Acceptance is the price of moving. Ahead, the track glimmers, not the glare of sunlight on glass, but the dull shine of ice worn by wheels. A single set of boot prints crosses it and vanishes into scrub. Wide tread. Hurried. You kneel. Put a finger into the bottom of a print. Find it still sharp, still cold, unfilled by the whispering snow. Fresh. The lieutenant's eyebrow asks you a question. You answer with your palm, flattening it. Lo, you become flatness. You are no taller than the brush, no louder than a raven's second thought. The rifle lies along your forearm, the strap a familiar weight across your shoulder blade. At 20 paces, you taste iron. At 10, you count heartbeats. At 5, you hear the small noises of another body, losing heat, the tiny faux coughs the throat makes to remind itself that it is built for speech. A Soviet sentry leans against a birch, as though the tree were an old friend who understands the boredom of duty. His face is a complication of scarves and a cap pulled down to the eyebrows, his breath fogging the rim of a woolen world. For a moment, you do not see an enemy. You see the geometry of winter arranging another man into a shape that might as well be yours. Then the geometry snaps shut. You show your teeth to the cold, not to him. A hand signal unwinds down the line. 2 move. You stay. The forest seems to flex, to pull its cloak tighter around every trunk. The end is quick, because that is a kindness you can sometimes afford. When it is done, you and another lift the body into a shallow drift under the birch. You take nothing, not even the matches that would have gladly become your fire later. You leave his pockets full in case someone who loves him comes looking and believes in inventory as a form of farewell. Snow starts again, the sort that appears without argument, a collectible of fine things falling from an unremarked sky. You slide forward to the hill. The forest arranges itself according to the plan on the lieutenant's palm. The enemy arranges himself according to a different plan drawn by a different hand on a different morning. Between the 2 drawings lies the precise space where living and dying trade notes. The first you hear is the muffled chatter of a Swami on the right, the sound like someone ripping cloth in a chapel. Then the reply, a Mosin's flat knock, the echo skating away between trunks. Your part is the hush, the angle, the way you become the shadow that meets another shadow and convinces it to lie down. The world shrinks to the size of your sight, to the half-moon of skin between glove and sleeve, to the wrenching sweetness of air you didn't know you were saving. When the pocket closes, it doesn't feel like victory. It feels like the end of a job half finished, breath ragged, boots wet, an inventory of small losses taken and given. A man in your squad has a black ear that was pink this morning. Another has a finger the color of jeweled plums, and the medic wraps it with a gentleness rarely employed by governments. Someone laughs once and stops, embarrassed by the noise. The forest prefers modesty. Afternoon in winter is a rumor. By the time the rumor reaches you, it is evening. The lieutenant chooses a stand of young pines, thick enough to break the wind. No fires. Always no fires. But the men work fast a trench, scraped down to frozen earth. Spruce boughs laid like baskets to keep your spines from learning the full cruelty of the ground. A snow wall lifted with shovels and mittened hands, to persuade the wind to practice its lesson elsewhere. You crawl into the hollow, pull the coat up, tuck the scarf into the collar, and feel the heat you carry, begin to argue less loudly with the cold you cannot appease. In the fading light, you sew a tear in your mitten with a length of thread and a needle that shakes like a leaf in a young tree. The movements are small, precise, absurdly domestic. Needle in, needle out. You do not think of home to keep from weeping. You think of the usefulness of mending. Mend, and the hand might feel its own blood longer. Mend, and the rifle stays a tool, not a betrayal. Mend, and something in you answers the insult of winter with a line of your own drawing. Night is a different forest on the same ground. Sound travels in straight lines. Light leaps from small things and shouts their names to the horizon. You speak less. The aurora tests the sky, paler tonight. A fishbone of green that lifts and falls like a breath you can almost pace. Far east, a rumble that feels like a train and isn't. The Red Army's rockets clearing their throats somewhere you cannot see. The men call them organs, as if music could be used for this. You imagine pipes taller than a church, and for a moment the metaphor becomes almost good enough to disguise the fear. Then the forest rejects metaphors and keeps the actual distance, direction, the simple fact of sound moving. You sleep in sentences, never in paragraphs. Between two of them, you dream of wood smoke rising from a chimney that refuses to remember fire. In the dream, a woman you almost recognize turns and says your name in a voice you cannot correct. You wake with your jaw clenched, and your hands already reaching for a rifle you do not need for dreams. You close your eyes again and reintroduce your body to the idea of rest, like a parent coaxing a child back under a blanket. Soft words, no false promises. Before dawn, the cold decides to become itself entirely. The river below the rise begins to sing not water, but ice, a chorus of long metallic vowels that flow through the valley like a warning no one has yet learned how to translate. You know the river is for crossing anyway. Orders do not consult geology. They impose grammar upon it. The engineers arrive like men who have been arguing with frost their entire lives. They kneel, listen to the ice with a steel rod. Tap, move, tap, move. The rhythm, a language you could understand if you were given a month and a teacher. They find a line that will do. You go first because you are light, or because the lieutenant trusts your eyes, or because the forest has decided you will be its coin today. You loosen your straps, push the rifle ahead on its sling, sink to your elbows and knees so your weight becomes a rumor the ice can ignore. You slide forward, inch on inch, the cold biting each thread through your coat, as if it had teeth and a schedule. At midpoint, the ice gives a warning, a concert hall creak, a sound that is not in any book you read as a boy. You stop and become an object, not a man, not a soldier, a thing that lies very still and persuades the world to do the same. The sound passes like a statement, amended and approved. You breathe again, forgetting the discipline of fours, simply taking air the way a drowning man takes advice. On the far bank, hands reach. Take your rifle, take your sleeve, take your name, and return it to you with interest. One by one, the squad follows. The engineers last, each man stepping into the place where the previous heartbeat survived. On the ridge beyond the river stands a farmhouse with its back broken and its door ajar. You enter like a thief who intends to tidy. The stove is a metal box with a mouthful of ash and no tongue. The table is a plank on legs that remember better days. In a drawer, you find a tin of matches wrapped in waxed paper as neatly as money. You close the drawer without taking them. You do not know who hid them, but you know that someone did, and the act of hiding belongs to people who still expect a return. Out back, you find what the forest has done with history. A Soviet dugout half collapsed, a circle of black stones where a small fire once pretended to be safe, a boot print flattened by freeze, a spoon stuck in frozen mud like a tiny flag. You kneel and pull the spoon free. The bowl is dented but not broken. You put it in your pocket beside the other small things you carry, because weight is a teacher too. The day chooses gray again. You move along the ridge, counting spruce, counting fences blown down, counting wire the enemy left that now belongs to no one. and will take a careless leg without asking for papers. You mark the wire with strips of cloth the color of surrender. A woodpecker works a snag with a diligence that makes you wish he had a uniform. By noon, the forest is kind. No contact, no shells, only the bureaucracy of cold and the paperwork of hunger. You stop long enough to melt snow in a mess tin, the flame so small it seems like vanity. Into the water goes a handful of peas from a packet someone swears is still edible. A chunk of pork fat the color of memory. A sprinkle of salt that tastes like a story from your grandfather. The soup boils at last with a sound like patience. You drink it greedily and then slowly in turn, passing the tin around, each man trying to leave more than he takes and failing by the margin of his own need. When it comes back, you scrape the sides with your spoon and taste metal and gratitude. The lieutenant unfolds a map whose corners have become whispers. He points with the spoon's handle to the next stand of trees and the low saddle beyond. We hold there, he says. If they push, we become branches. If they don't, we become roots. The men nod. The metaphors are permitted because they are the right shape. You pocket the spoon again and stand. Your knees argue. Your back files a complaint. Your feet have joined a union that demands better boots. You respect their solidarity and go on. In late afternoon, you find tracks that aren't yours. Soviet skis. The long, straight story of another line of men moving through the same grammar, headed for a hill that offers a view you had planned to borrow. You pause, listen, hear nothing but the net of silence pulled tight. The lieutenant whistles once, soft as regret, and the squad fans like twilight through birch and spruce. Close now. You smell wool that has been asked to be skinned for too long. You taste the sour profile of men who have run out of tobacco and jokes. You see shapes where there shouldn't be shapes, angles where nature would prefer curves. You become the shadow that asks a question with a finger to the lips. The answer comes as it must. The forest processes it without comment. After, you pull a letter from a dead man's pocket and put it back. You smooth the coat where your hand wrinkled it, a gesture that means nothing to the world and everything to you. Across a small clearing, a sapling has been bent and tied to make a snare for rabbits. You cut the cord, let the sapling stand up straight. There is a pleasure in freeing even a tree. Dusk is early and absolute. You build a snow shelter with your hands, because the shovel has become a rumor shared between squads. You carve the entry low. You smooth the ceiling to persuade drip to choose a different house. The air inside warms by the smallest of degrees, enough to remind your lungs they are guests here, not convicts. You lie with your pack under your knees and your rifle across your chest, and listen to the soft, intermittent music of snow shifting against snow. It is the gentlest sound the war has given you. Sleep comes as a truce, not a gift. Somewhere in it, your mother names you once, and in the dream, you do not correct her pronunciation. When you wake, the world has become a room again. The doorway a dark rectangle, where morning will arrive like a clerk stamping papers no one has read. You crawl out, and the cold finds a new part of you to own. You let it file the deed. You keep the land that remains. The march resumes. The forest's tests continue. You step, you listen, you mend, you melt. You refuse to take more than you must. You accept more than you wish. You become the sum of small decisions made correctly. You become the quiet arithmetic of endurance. On the fourth day, the sky clears as though a debt has been paid. Sun rakes the snow until it shatters into 1,000 dazzlings. The light is a lie, and you know it. It offers warmth. It cannot provide, but you forgive it for the sake of color. The distant pines go black-green, the birches white as a priest's cuffs. The smoke of your breath blue for a half-second before the air erases it. Beauty arrives without apology. You do not make it choose a side. At the crest of a hill you did not earn, you stop and look over a frozen lake wide as a parliament. The surface is scrolled with the writing ice makes. When it thinks no one is watching, long cracks like signatures. Snowdrift sentences broken mid-phrase. Beyond the lake, a village crouches, roofs bowed, chimneys eyeless. Somewhere beneath that ice, fish move with the slow certainty of creatures that know nothing of flags. Somewhere in those houses, a woman hid matches in a drawer because she believed in returning. Behind you, the men settle, grateful for a horizon that isn't bark. Juka leans on his poles, breathes a laugh with no sound, and says, "It's big enough to hold all our questions and still have room for spring." You nod, and the nod becomes an oath you don't have to say out loud. You will cross what must be crossed. You will hold what must be held. You will be a man among men in a forest that asks for nothing less than that, and often asks for more. You tighten the strap, lift the rifle, feel the familiar argument your muscles have with the day. The lake waits, the village waits, the questions wait, polite as ever. The forest watches, withholding judgment. You move. Survival here is not victory. It is the practice of remaining. It is the temperature at which a promise refuses to freeze. It is the patience to listen to a river of ice until it tells you where to place your weight. It is the habit of closing doors softly, so heat stays where people sleep. It is the refusal to let the cold decide your name. And as you slide down toward the lake, you realize that endurance, in this place, is not merely what you do. It is what the land does with you, reshaping, pairing, teaching, until the line between your will and the forest's becomes as thin and resilient as the ice you will trust with your life before the sun reaches its false noon. You learn that sisu is measured in quiet chores, in the way you lace frozen boots without swearing, in the way you thaw the bolt with your palm instead of your breath so it doesn't ice again, in the way you break the crust of snow over a latrine trench and fold the white back like a page, neat, respectful, as if the forest were a book you hope to return in good condition. It's in how you share heat. A mitten pressed into another man's hands while he rubs life back into fingers turned the color of plums. A cuff tugged down over a wrist. A scarf retied by someone who doesn't bother to make it look accidental. The small mercies that travel along a trench line faster than orders do. You carry your weight, and then a little more. Extra rounds because the boy at the end of the file is 19 and won't admit his pack is already teaching his bones unpleasant mathematics. A mess tin. When Juka's strap snaps. A story told low enough that it doesn't cost the air much to hear it. Not heroism. Maintenance. Keeping the machine of us from seizing in the cold. When the shelling starts, you do not run. There is nowhere warmer to go. You flatten, count, wait for the gap that is not mercy but physics. Then move 2 pines forward and stop again. Shards rattle the branches like sleet. Snow dusts your back. Far off, a rocket organ drags its iron fingernails across the sky. Your heart tries to change its rhythm. Sisu keeps the beat. On patrol, sisu is the patience to be invisible. You lie with your cheek to the moss and learn the taste of bark. You time your breath to the wind's small arguments with the needles. You let the forest decide when your muscles may speak. When the shadow at the road's bend resolves into a man, you do not congratulate yourself for waiting. You simply rise with the others and do the work quietly, because noise is expensive and you are poor. In ambush, sisu is the willingness to trust a match you don't strike yet. Your hand holds a bottle, gasoline, sawdust, a rag that smells like the last garage in a town the map forgot. You balance it in snow like an offering. When the Soviet armored car noses into the cut, a steel animal sniffing for heat, you do not think of speeches. You think of wind direction, the way flame moves like a thought, the timing between throw and step. The world narrows to angle and distance. Glass breaks, fire flowers, and the night learns your name and then forgets it again in smoke. After there are hands on your shoulders, someone's thanks, someone's tally, someone's way of saying still here. You nod because words feel fragile right next to flame. Then you go back to counting. Men, rounds, matches, minutes, until the sky thins and the cold grows teeth again. On bad days, sisu is a refusal. You refuse to hate your own feet when they tingle back from the brink, like clumsy guests returning to a party they almost left. You refuse to spend the last sugar cube unless the man beside you is shaking. You refuse the neatness of despair because despair wants to tidy you away, and you are not furniture. On worse days, sisu is a ritual. You kneel and rub a comrade's hands between yours until his knuckles find color. You take his rifle apart and put it back together so the weapon remembers it has a job, and the man remembers he is not alone. You crack the ice in the canteen with the butt of your knife and hand it over as if it were wine. You speak his name the way you would speak to a stubborn lamp, gently, as if light had feelings. At night, when the forest loosens its jaw and the stars glance down like old accountants, you make your private oath again. Not to flags they change, not to lines. You've marched through too many pencil strokes on too many maps to trust graphite. You swear to the small circle of breath you can warm and to the backs you can reach with your hands. To the road you will leave passable. The door you will close softly. The matches you will not take. And when sleep finally ambushes you, it does so kindly without theatrics. You fall the way snow falls quiet, filling cracks first. In the dream, the lake at the edge of your town has no soldiers on it. The ice sings, but only to speak of spring. Your mother folds bread in a cloth. Your father says your name the way a man sets down a tool at day's end, satisfied, careful, ready to pick it up again. You wake with the taste of rye in your mouth and the shape of their voices still warm in your chest. The cold takes a share and leaves you enough. Morning. You rub frost from the sight. Check the bolt, flex fingers. Stamp once to remind your feet you are their landlord, not their tenant. The lieutenant moves down the line, a silhouette with a map that has learned humility. He says what men say before work. Hold here, move there, mind the wire, watch the drift, and beneath it, the true instruction together. You glance through the pines. Beyond them, a frozen lake lies like a page, waiting for the next line. Somewhere across it, other men are making other oaths in other forests. You will meet them halfway, because that is how these things are written. Not yet. You whisper once more, less a defiance now than a habit that keeps the day from cracking. The word hangs in the air, a small cloud that dissolves without argument. Habit is what remains when courage is busy elsewhere. And then you rise, and the line rises with you, and the pines take your measure and permit you to pass. The snow gives grudgingly. The light is thin but adequate. Your breath burns a little. Your legs answer anyway. The forest does not step aside, not yet, but it yields enough for men who have promised themselves to the next footfall. This is the ground you stand until the ground itself moves. Not politics, not borders, but the simple arithmetic of men who refuse subtraction. In the ledger of the North, you are a stubborn entry. The auditors can come later. For now there is only the column, the cold, the work, and that quiet promise beneath the northern sky renewed with every step until even the trees must admit you belong. The sound comes before the sight, a deep groan from beneath the snow, like the land itself remembering how to breathe. You pause, one hand against a birch trunk slick with meltwater. All around, the forest is changing. The snow that once shielded your steps now collapses underfoot. Water pools in your footprints, each one filling with mud, ice, and the reflection of a sky gone gray. The trenches, those narrow veins that once felt permanent, begin to vanish beneath the thaw. Boots slip in slush. Rifles sink muzzle first into half-frozen earth. The smell returns, a sour mix of rot, smoke, and things that should have stayed buried. You had almost forgotten what spring truly means here. Not flowers, but flood. You watch a comrade dig with a tin cup, trying to free a buried crate of ammunition from a small lake forming in the trench. The water keeps coming. It seeps through gloves, fills boots, turns socks into ice-laden ropes. The ground itself seems to reject you, as if it has grown tired of your war. Overhead, ravens return. They circle lazily, black commas against the melting sky. You used to count them for omens. Now, you count them for company. The first rain doesn't fall so much as it leaks thin threads dripping from the trees. Slow, persistent, the way memory leaks through a wound. It seeps into everything. The seams of your coat, the barrel of your rifle, the seams of your thoughts. Every sound is soft now. The forest no longer crackles or snaps, it sighs. You step out of the trench and the mud clings to you, greedy as a hand refusing to let go. Each boot is heavier than the last. The path ahead is a brown ribbon winding between birches, whose bark peels like skin from sunburn. A truck tries to pass and sinks halfway to its axles before the engine gives up in a cough of black smoke. The driver swears once and climbs onto the hood, staring at the horizon like a man watching a ship go down. Everywhere you look, things are coming undone. Sandbags split, spilling their guts into the flood. Barbed wire uncoils like dead snakes. The trees themselves seem to bend lower, their branches heavy with wet. The war feels slower now. Not quieter, just heavier. As if every shell, every heartbeat must drag itself through water before reaching its mark. When night comes, you can't find dry ground. You sleep sitting, back against a tree, boots half submerged, blankets soaked through. The mosquitoes have returned, drunk and vengeful, and the buzzing fills the dark like a chorus of tiny engines. Someone jokes that they are the real victors of this war. No one laughs. In the morning, the world smells of thawed things, roots, rust, and rot. A mist hangs over the flooded forest, so thick that the line between earth and sky disappears. You raise your hand, and for a heartbeat, even your outline seems uncertain. It's as if the land itself has forgotten shape, and you too are just another thing slowly melting into spring. The prayer dies in the wet air before it can rise. You hear only the sound of dripping steady, merciless, endless. The forest, once a sanctuary, has turned to a graveyard that cannot make up its mind whether to bury or unearth its dead. The ground heaves with meltwater, and what the snow once kept secret now rises to the surface like truth, unwilling to stay silent. You walk slower now, not from fatigue alone, but from caution. The thaw has made the world unpredictable. Every step could end in mud deep enough to steal a boot or worse, a memory you'd rather keep hidden. Somewhere underfoot, like cartridges, helmets, bits of bone, the forest has learned to digest metal and flesh with the same quiet appetite. The others say little. Their faces are gray with the color of the season, eyes filmed with smoke and sleeplessness. Even laughter, when it comes, feels reluctant, like something borrowed from another life. You notice that no one whistles anymore. Whistling used to mean courage, or at least denial. Now, it would only sound like mockery in a place this drowned. You stop at a bend in the road where the water flows faster. There's a log jam, branches, crates, a wheel, and a man tangled among them. His face is pale as birch bark, his eyes half open as if still searching for something above the surface. You recognize the collar tabs, not from your own army. A Russian. You think of how he might have drowned trying to cross the same flood, chasing orders written by men who had never seen this place. You crouch beside him, close his eyes with your fingertips, and say nothing. The gesture feels useless and necessary at the same time. Juka comes up behind you, his breath wheezing through the damp scarf around his mouth. There will be more of them, he says. The river takes everything now. You nod, still looking at the water. The river remembers better than we do. He shrugs. Then maybe it should be the one to write history. The wind picks up, carrying the scent of iron again. You shoulder your pack, the straps stiff and swollen, and move on. By midday, the thaw becomes a fever. Rain falls without pattern, sometimes a mist, sometimes a downpour that feels like punishment. The horizon dissolves into smoke and haze. A horse carcass blocks the road ahead, its ribs rising like the frame of a ruined chapel. You and two others drag it aside, the flesh coming apart like wet paper. None of you speak while working. The sound of your boots in the mud is the only language left that makes sense. In a patch of higher ground, an old cabin leans among the trees, its roof sagging, but intact. You push open the door. The hinges groan as if surprised to be remembered. Inside, the smell of mold and smoke greets you, human, familiar. Someone once lived here. Someone cooked, sang, maybe prayed. The hearth still holds ash. You crouch and run a gloved hand through it. Dry. Miraculous. You strike a match and feed it the last scraps of kindling from your pouch. The flame catches reluctantly, licking at the walls, warming nothing but the illusion of comfort. The others crowd close, faces glowing in the weak orange. Feels like a church, one murmurs. You glance at the flames. Then we're the congregation. No one laughs, but no one argues either. Outside, the rain becomes sleet. You hear it tapping on the roof, irregular and gentle, like fingers drumming on a coffin lid. You stretch your hands toward the fire until the skin burns. Steam rises from your sleeves, carrying the smell of wet wool and human endurance. When the light begins to fade, someone pulls a tin of meat from a pocket and passes it around. You take a bite and chew without tasting. Hunger has become mechanical, a function more than a need. Before sleeping, You step outside for a moment. The air has cooled again, and mist crawls across the swamp like breath on glass. The birches stand motionless in the fog, pale pillars holding up a collapsing sky. You listen for nightingales, but none have returned yet. Only frogs croak, low and mournful, as if reciting names you've forgotten. At dawn, you wake to silence. The fire has died, leaving only a circle of blackened wood. Your hands are stiff, your knees swollen, your back sore from the damp. You shoulder your rifle, though you half expect it to crumble in your grasp. Outside, a thin crust of ice has formed again on the puddles, fragile as glass. Spring is teasing you, playing its cruel game of advance and retreat. You begin the march again, through fog so thick it seems to erase the world. Somewhere ahead, the lieutenant's voice cuts through. Keep the line tight. Don't wander from the path. His words sound far away, as if shouted from another era. The path winds through a grove of pines where the snow has melted into black pools. You wade through them, each step sending up a ring of ripples that vanish into the mist. The forest hums softly, alive again, but not in a way that brings peace. Every rustle, every drip feels sentient, as though the earth itself is watching, remembering, deciding who deserves to stay. Then the smell hits you, not of rot this time, but of something raw and sharp. Fuel, oil. You step forward and see what's left of an outpost half submerged in the water. The roof has collapsed. The radio mast tilts drunkenly. Inside, the floor is a mirror of oil-slicked water. A helmet floats by, bumping softly against a desk. You lift it, shake it dry. A Finnish mark painted on the side. You wonder which of you it once belonged to. Jukka finds a book on the table, a journal. Its pages fused together. He opens it carefully, only to find the ink has run into blue veins that look almost beautiful. Words turn to rivers. Stories erased by the same water that now carries you. He tears one page free and holds it up to the light. Nothing legible remains. Maybe it's better this way, he says. Who'd want to remember this? You say nothing. Memory, you've learned, isn't a choice. It's a residue. By evening, you reach higher ground again, an old logging camp, now reduced to splinters. The last snow lingers in the shadows like the breath of ghosts. The lieutenant orders you to dig new trenches. You dig, though the mud sucks at the shovel, mocking the effort. Each scoop fills with water faster than you can empty it. When the work ends, you're covered in filth, hands blistered, boots stinking of rot. You sit on a log and look at your reflection in a puddle. The face staring back is pale, the eyes older than they should be. There's a faint smear of dirt across your cheek that could be blood or shadow. You wipe it, but it stays. Jukka sits beside you, chewing a piece of bark like tobacco. They say when the snow melts, he says, the dead return to see what's become of the world they left. You glance at the horizon, where the sun bleeds through clouds like a wound refusing to close. Then they'll be disappointed. He nods, spitting the bark into the mud. Still, maybe they're luckier than us. They don't have to see the rest. A moment of silence follows, broken only by the distant croak of frogs and the occasional crack of distant artillery. Even that feels tired, like thunder yawning at the end of a long storm. Later, as night falls, the temperature drops again. The swamp begins to harden in places, the water skinning over with fragile ice. The world seems caught between seasons, between life and death, unable to choose either. You wrap your coat tighter, Pull your cap low and listen to the slow drip from the branches. Each drop is a second. Each second, a reminder that time continues, even when the world seems too exhausted to follow. You dream that night. Not of home, not exactly, but of something like it. A road through tall grass, dry and golden, untouched by mud or snow. A house whose windows are open to summer air. A woman standing by the door, her face half in shadow, half in sunlight. She says something you can't hear, and then the sound of rain begins to fall, pulling you back into the swamp. You wake to thunder, but it isn't thunder, it's artillery again. The Soviets, testing the river crossings. You roll into the mud, grab your rifle, curse under your breath. The line forms in the dark, half-submerged men waiting for commands that come too slowly. You can't see the enemy, only the flashes of light across the water. The shells strike the far bank, sending up geysers of mud and spray. The air fills with steam and panic. Then silence returns, thick and absolute. The lieutenant shouts for a report. No one answers. One of the machine gunners lies face down, the back of his helmet dented like a crushed pot. You help turn him over. His eyes are open, clear as the sky that will never return. Someone closes them. The gesture feels routine now. You move on. When the night finally calms, you sit again by the fireless camp. The swamp steams around you. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls once and falls silent. The rain begins again, softer this time, as if apologizing for everything it has done. You tilt your head back, letting the drops fall onto your face. Each one is cold, clean, temporary. You wonder how much longer the war will last, and then realize it doesn't matter. The war has already soaked into the earth. It's in the mud, in the trees, in the rivers that now carry both blood and spring water to the same destination. You close your eyes, breathing in the smell of wet pine and rusted iron. The forest exhales with you. For a moment, it feels almost alive again, not as a battleground, but as something older and wiser, watching you with weary patience. And then faintly, you hear the groan again, the land remembering how to breathe. But this time, it sounds less like pain and more like surrender. Food runs out before hope does. That's the rule. You ration the hard biscuits. Chew slow so the illusion of eating lasts longer. The tinned meat tastes like the inside of a shovel. Water is everywhere, but clean water is nowhere. You boil it anyway. Watch the scum rise. Drink with your eyes closed. Fever spreads faster than orders. Men stumble from their posts and collapse beside puddles, breathing shallow, muttering to ghosts that only thawed earth could summon. The medics have nothing left but cloth and comfort. You help one carry a stretcher through knee-deep mud, the weight too light to mean life. The discipline that once held you all together starts to fray. Some steal food, others share too much. Arguments flare, then die, swallowed by exhaustion. No one blames anyone anymore. The line between comrade and stranger dissolves, as the forest reclaims everyone equally. At dusk, you sit on a fallen tree, boots leaking, body shivering in slow rhythm. Across from you, Juka smiles weakly and says, "At least the mosquitoes are back. The living always complain." You almost laugh. It sounds wrong, but you let it out anyway. It feels human. The laughter fades quickly, swallowed by the forest like breath into fog. Juka stares into the half-light, and for a moment, you can almost believe he's smiling At the absurdity of it all, the idea that life insists on continuing, even here, where everything smells of rust and decay. The mosquitoes hum around your heads, tiny, persistent tyrants. You wave a hand to chase them away, but they return instantly, as if mocking the effort. The night air thickens with damp. The mist gathers low, wrapping around the trunks of the trees, softening their shapes until the world feels less solid, more dream than place. You pull your coat tighter, the wool stiff with mud, and think of dry rooms, of the sound of bread being sliced, of chairs that don't sink into the earth beneath them. You think of home, though you stopped saying the word aloud months ago. It feels fragile now, like glass, something that could shatter if spoken too clearly. Behind you, a pot boils weakly over a small fire. Someone has scraped the bottom of a ration tin and mixed the remains with melted snow. The smell is faint, metallic, but it's the closest thing to food you've had all day. You take your share, a few spoonfuls of gray mush, and eat it without ceremony. It burns your tongue, but you don't care. Warmth has become its own flavor. Juka watches you. You ever wonder, he says quietly, what we'll do when this is over? If it ends, I mean. Oh, you swallow. Look up. The firelight catches the hollows under his eyes, the way the skin is tightened around his cheekbones. He looks like a candle burning from both ends. When it ends, you reply, I'll sleep for a year. He chuckles, a dry sound. And then I'll wake up and pretend this never happened. He nods, staring into the flames. Maybe that's the only way anyone ever lives after war. Pretending. The fire cracks. Somewhere in the distance, a branch breaks. Both of you freeze. The sound carries strangely in the wet air, sharp, then gone. You glance toward the darkness, every sense straining. Nothing moves. Just the forest shifting in its sleep. Still, your hand drifts toward your rifle, the gesture automatic, like a heartbeat. When nothing follows, you exhale. It's just the ice breaking, you murmur. Juka shakes his head. No, my friend, that's the world breaking. By morning, the camp smells of sickness. A man in the next trench is delirious, his skin burning despite the cold. His breath rattles, each exhale a wet, bubbling sound. The medic kneels beside him, whispering something that sounds like a prayer but could just as easily be an apology. You stand nearby, holding a canteen. The water inside is brown, but it's all there is. When the medic gestures, you pass it over. The man drinks greedily, then coughs, spilling half of it down his chin. Steam rises from his fevered skin. The medic glances at you. His eyes are hollow, the pupils small from exhaustion. He won't last the night, he says simply. None of the fever cases do. You nod. There's nothing else to say. By midday, 3 more are gone. You help dig the grave's shallow, hurried holes in soft earth. The mud sucks at the shovel, and each load you lift feels heavier than the last. You cover the bodies with whatever scraps of tarp and blanket remain. There's no time for crosses, no wood dry enough to carve them from. Only a moment of silence. But even that feels indulgent when artillery hums faintly somewhere to the east. When the last grave is covered, you stand there for a while, staring at the uneven mounds. The forest is quiet again, the air thick with the smell of wet soil. You think about how easily the land takes back its own. No ceremony, no protest, just absorption. Juka comes up beside you, wiping his hands on his coat. We'll forget where they are in a week, he says softly. The ground will eat the markers. You nod. Maybe that's mercy. He looks at you sideways. You really believe that? I have to. That night, rain returns not gentle, but angry, as if trying to scrub the war clean. It hammers on helmets, trickles down collars, fills the trenches until they're rivers again. You sit on the edge, feet dangling into the water, watching ripples form and fade. Across the way, someone starts singing. The voice is hoarse, broken in places, but you recognize the tune, a folk song from Karelia, about a fisherman who never comes home. The melody carries through the rain, wavering, fragile. Others join in, low at first, then louder, until the camp hums with the sound of ghosts remembering they once had lungs. You don't join, you just listen. The song feels too heavy for your mouth, too sacred for your throat. It sounds like grief pretending to be music. Still, for a few minutes, it stitches the men together again, threadbare souls, connected by something older than orders or flags. When it ends, the silence feels deeper than before. The rain softens, as if listening. You lie back on the slick earth, staring at the clouds that hide the stars. Somewhere above, the sky must still exist, but you haven't seen it in weeks. You imagine it anyway. Clear, endless, impossible blue. You think of summer, of lakes that don't freeze, of children throwing stones into water that reflects nothing but sunlight. You close your eyes and try to remember the sound those stones made when they hit the surface. Sleep comes late and rough. When it finally takes you, it drags you into dreams that feel too real. You're home again, standing in a field where the grass bends under wind. Your mother is there, calling your name from the porch. You turn toward her, but the voice fades into the rustle of the reeds. The sky darkens, the field becomes a swamp, and you wake gasping, half convinced you've drowned. Dawn brings fog so thick you can't see 10 meters ahead. The world has been reduced to sound the drip of water, the squelch of boots, the whisper of men moving through unseen spaces. Orders are passed down the line, muffled, uncertain. You follow without question. Questions are luxuries that cost energy you no longer have. The fog clings to your eyelashes, to the inside of your collar. Your breath feels like steam from a dying machine. You walk with your head low, rifle slung across your chest, feet numb in the wet. The forest is unrecognizable now, just the suggestion of shapes and the smell of thawing moss. Then faintly, a different sound. A clank, a motor sputtering somewhere beyond the mist. Everyone stops. The air holds its breath. You crouch, straining to listen. The sound comes again, closer this time. A Soviet patrol. The lieutenant gestures silently. Positions. Cover. You move behind a tree, sink to one knee, the cold seeping through your bones. Your heart begins its steady hammering, that mix of fear and focus you know too well. The mist shifts, and shadows emerge, 4, maybe 5 men. Rifles slung, boots sucking at the mud. Their uniforms are soaked, faces pale. They look as tired as you do. For a moment, neither side moves. You could almost believe your reflections of one another, trapped on opposite sides of a mirror. Then someone's boot slips. A splash. A curse. The mirror shatters. Gunfire breaks the quiet. Muzzle flashes bloom briefly, unnatural flowers in the fog. The world becomes noise and movement. You fire twice. Duck, move, reload, fire again. The air fills with the smell of gunpowder and wet bark. Shouts in Russian, then silence. When the fog clears, the ground is darker. One of yours is down a young man you barely knew. One of theirs lies nearby, hand still gripping his rifle, eyes wide in disbelief. You stare at him for a long time. He can't be older than 20, a face that could have belonged to anyone. To you, the lieutenant says something about moving on. You obey. The bodies are left behind. The forest will take care of them, the way it always does. By the time you reach the next ridge, the rain has stopped. The air feels cleaner, though it's only an illusion. You set up camp beneath a cluster of pines, the ground soft but dry enough for sleep. Someone finds a can of coffee grounds and brews it over a small flame. The smell cuts through the damp like memory through grief. You take a sip, it's bitter and perfect. Juka joins you, wrapping his coat tighter. You ever notice, he says, how the worst things are always followed by something small and good? A sip of coffee, a dry patch of ground, a moment that tricks you into thinking maybe the world isn't finished with mercy. You smile faintly. Maybe that's all mercy ever was, small moments between disasters. He grins, and for the first time in days, it looks genuine. Then let's make this one last as long as we can. You nod, holding the tin cup close to your lips, feeling the warmth seep into your fingers. For a little while, the war fades. The swamp, the hunger, the ghost, they all step back, waiting. You sip, and the coffee tastes like the past. Bitter, human, alive. When the cup is empty, you stare at the bottom, tracing the muddy residue with your thumb. When this is over, you whisper, I don't think I'll ever complain about rain again. Chuka chuckles softly. You'll curse it, same as before. You'll forget. That's how we survive. He's right, and you know it. Forgetting is the only way forward. But tonight, with the steam rising from your hands and the frogs singing somewhere in the distance, you let yourself remember anyway, just a little. The feel of sunlight on skin, the weight of bread still warm from an oven, the sound of laughter that doesn't have to apologize. The night deepens. You stretch out on the cold ground, staring up through the web of branches. The stars have finally returned, faint, distant, blurred by thin mist. But there, you count them until the numbers stop making sense. Somewhere in the silence between breaths, you realize that the world, despite everything, still turns. And maybe that's enough. The ground no longer holds. Each step is a negotiation with gravity and despair. The maps mean nothing, rivers have moved, roads have sunk, and the swamp devours even memory. Your unit is scattered across miles of flooded woods. Voices echo through the mist but fade before they reach you. You follow the sound of dripping water, the slow percussion of melt against bark. Somewhere, the war still rages, artillery to the east, engines to the west, but here, it's quieter. The forest doesn't need sides. It wins by waiting. You find a trench you once dug in winter. It's a pond now. The sandbags float like bloated fish. A helmet drifts past, half filled with brown water, still carrying the ghost of a name. That night, you camp on higher ground, a small rise dry enough for a fire. The flames hiss as they eat wet twigs. Around it, men huddle without speaking. The firelight reflects in their eyes, and you realize they no longer look like soldiers. They look like survivors of something older than war, an ancient struggle between men and the season that never ends. The forest listens. The water moves. The night smells of iron and thaw. You lie back, staring up at the naked branches clawing at the fading stars, and you understand that winter was never the enemy. It was the test. And spring, this wet, gasping, unholy season, is the reckoning. You wake to a sound like torn cloth. Not gunfire, ice breaking somewhere below the hill. The skin of a hidden stream ripping as the water remembers its path. Dawn is a smear of tin over the horizon. The fire has eaten itself to embers. The men are shapes under damp blankets, each shape with a breath and a burden. You sit up slowly, feeling the ache that spring puts into joints, an ache that is not age but argument. The body argues for warmth. The world makes its case for cold. Down the slope, the pond that used to be a trench has grown a rim of scum, the color of old brass. Mosquitoes hatch in quiet spirals, the first scouts of a summer that promises no favors. You stamp your boots, work the stiff laces, flex your toes until feeling returns in needles. When you stand, you sway once, the ground shifting under the grass as if the hill were a raft, and you its unsteady passenger. Orders come as a series of gestures, and half-words save the voice, save the lungs. The lieutenant points west, then south. A rise, a copse, a logging track that might still be above the flood. The map comes out, edges furred with use, ink blurred to suggestions. A river is no longer a line, but a guess. You make peace with guessing. Spring demands that too. You move, and the hill lets you go with a wet sigh. The first 100 meters are simple. Roots for steps, dry hummocks like islands. Then the ground gives up pretending and becomes water with bark sticking out of it. You wade. The cold climbs to the knees, then the thighs. You lift the rifle high and hope your balance is worth more than pride. Behind you, Juka swears softly in a voice too tired to rise. A row of birches appears out of the mist like a procession in white. Between them, a bridge of logs, old gray, laced with wire. You test the first with your heel. It bobs, then settles. 2 at a time across, rifles passed hand to hand, the line breathing as one creature, long and careful. At the midpoint, the logs roll. Someone gasps. You drop to a crouch and spread weight like a prayer. The bridge chooses not to teach a lesson today. You thank it with your silence. On the far bank, a meadow remembers itself. Last year's stalks lay flattened like hair after rain. You cross it in a file, the water at your ankles now, the cold making promises to your bones. At the meadow's edge, a shape emerges. A small chapel, logs settled into themselves, a roof patched with tin. The door stands open. Inside, the air smells faintly of wax and damp wood. A shelf holds 3 candles, stubs, their wicks fused into little commas of soot. Someone lights one, and the room takes a breath it didn't know it still had. No icons remain. The wall where they hung is paler, a ghost of rectangles above the altar table. You lay your hand on the wood and feel the cool of a place built to hold quiet. The men don't pray. They stand, caps in hands, and let their shoulders settle. Juka finds a broom in the corner, and with the solemnity of a man burying a king, sweeps mud into a neat pile. You straighten a fallen stool. The lieutenant sets the map on the altar, and for a heartbeat, you think of how often lines have been blessed in rooms where men believed in different kinds of mercy. Outside again, the day has decided to be gray. No rain for now. The kindest thing it can manage is pause. You follow the logging track as it climbs. The rut's full of water that reflects a sky you do not trust. Twice, the track disappears into swamp. Twice, it returns as a ribbon of raised earth. The forest murmurs frogs. Melt. The soft collision of drops from branch to branch. Somewhere distant, artillery rolls to the east like barrels in a cellar. Near noon, you smell smoke, not the ghost of your own fire, but something heavier, fuel-bitten. You crouch. The track bends ahead, and when you peer around the curve, you see it. A Soviet supply sled overturned in the ditch. Canvas torn back, crates split, tins scattered like coins. No bodies in sight. The mud keeps secrets. You listen long enough to be sure the nearby woods contain only your own breath and the ordinary business of animals. The lieutenant signals quick hands. You move to the ditch, fingers numb in wet gloves, prying open tins. Fish, meat, bread hard enough to nail a roof. You pass them back, person to person. Small gleams in mud-brown hands. Someone finds a sack of oats, swollen and sweet with damp. You pour a handful into your mouth. It tastes like a field in memory, sun on grain, larks up where no shell can reach. You laugh once, quietly, at the shock of it. Juka grins, oat dust in his beard. Don't tell the enemy we're enjoying ourselves, he says. They'll send rain out of spite. O mosquitoes, you answer. Same ministry. You leave the ditch lighter than you found it, not out of courtesy but speed. The forest does not appreciate long visits to other people's misfortune. Back on the track, the men move with a new rhythm, the rhythm food gives. Even a biscuit can tune a day. At a rise, you halt. Beyond, the land falls away into a basin where spring has built a drowned museum. Fences that stop at water, a cart whose wheels lean like tired thoughts, a scarecrow that has learned to bow. In the middle stands a farmhouse on a knoll barely dry enough to pretend. The roof is patched with mismatched boards. The chimney leans, smoke threads out anyway. Smoke means people. People mean questions. You approach in a line that tries to look less like soldiers and more like visitors. A woman meets you at the yard's edge, scarf tight, face the color of unpainted wood. A boy stands behind her, eyes big, hands hidden in sleeves too long. The woman lifts her chin. She does not step back. Water? The lieutenant asks in careful Karelian, as if language itself were a gift he might chip by handling. She stares, then nods at a barrel under the eaves. You can see a film on top. You skim it with a mug and hand it to Juka. He drinks, grimaces, drinks again. Good, he says, lying just well enough. The boy slips around you, goes to the shed, returns with a bundle of sticks, dry ones, the miracle of good housekeeping. He gives them to you as if granting a favor and a test. You nod thanks. He does not nod back. His eyes have already learned the arithmetic of spring. Subtract strangers. Add silence. The woman points to your sleeve where a seam has split. She gestures for a needle. You hand her your small kit. She sits on the step and mends with motions that could sew a world together if given enough thread. You watch her hands, the way the needle's point knows where to go, and think of all the torn maps that could use such certainty. You trade a tin of meat for a loaf that tastes of rye and smoke. The boy stares at the meat like it might tell a story if he listens hard enough. Before leaving, you fix the shed door that sags on its hinge. It takes 2 nails and the flat of a rifle butt. The woman says nothing, but when you step off the knoll, She lifts 2 fingers to her temple in a salute that is not military and somehow cuts deeper. The basin around the farm hums the chorus of thaw, of water discovering paths older than roads. You skirt its edge and find a spit of ground that leads toward the next line of trees. The sky darkens without rain. The world has decided to rest on a low note. In the trees again, the ground firms. You breathe easier. Then a sound you have learned to hate and obey in equal measure. The low, layered growl of engines where they should not be. You drop. The line drops. You crawl to a trunk and make yourself an indentation in moss that smells like old pennies. Through the green you see them, a pair of Soviet armored cars sliding along a drier ridge, crews hunched, canvas wet, antennae whipping like long grass in wind. They move without hurry, as if spring has granted them a road where everyone else sinks. The lieutenant's hand does the math. You count bottles, you count courage, you count distance to the bend where the road narrows. A small ambush against a small column. Spring rewards modesty. You belly crawl to your place behind a windthrow, where roots knuckle up like a fist. The bottle in your hand is warm from your pocket, the rag dark with fuel. You wait for the angle you practiced under snow. Only now the air is wet and the wind is indecisive. The first car noses past the juniper, engine coughing. The second hesitates at the bend. You light, you rise, you throw. The bottle arcs with all the grace your shoulder still owns. It breaks on metal and spreads upward like a bad idea that finds a crowd. Fire takes hold reluctantly, everything is wet, but then rags and paint and wires conspire, and the car becomes a lantern in fog. The second slews left, tries to turn its nose toward your line. Someone else throws and misses. Someone else shoots and does not. The tire buckles. The car drops its weight into the ditch like a beast that has chosen where to die. Men spill out, burning and not, shouting, firing toward trees that contain only silence and practiced patience. The firefight is brief because everyone is tired. Then engines stop, and the forest considers what to do with 2 new shapes. Silence afterward is never empty. It holds the names of things that have just happened and the names of things about to. You breathe, exhale, taste ash, taste wet metal. Juka's hand finds your shoulder and squeezes once. The gesture says everything there is to say in spring. Still here. You leave fast. Ambush demands you stop believing in the place you've altered. Back on the logging track, the men move like a river that has remembered its banks. The lieutenant checks each face as you pass a birch with a strip of bark peeled away like a bandage of field mark, a sign to another patrol that you were here and made a choice. Afternoon thins to evening. You find a rise that pretends to be dry and make camp with a competence that feels almost like pride. A fire, yes, small and low, guarded by a screen of wet boughs. Over it, a pot that contains the best stew spring can produce. Oats, water, a thumb of meat, a memory of onion someone swears was real. The steam smells like hope that doesn't embarrass itself by saying so. Around the fire, men sit with their backs against packs, boots off where possible, socks steaming like small sacrifices. You pass the tin, pass a joke, pass the last matchbox like a relic. The chaplain appears, as he often does out of the woods, as if the trees had decided you required a human who remembers more nouns than mud. He doesn't read. He listens. One by one, the men place words at his feet. A name, a house, a lake. He gathers them like pine cones. You say nothing, and he nods in a way that tells you he heard the silence you offered instead. Night comes from all directions, soft-footed. The fire diminishes to coals, each one an eye trying not to close. Above, the branches knit a roof that lets only the most stubborn stars through. In the dark, stories arrive. The time a bear took a man's boot because it was the only thing in camp that smelled alive. The winter a river froze so perfectly it sang scales when you skated. The day a cow learned to open a gate with her tongue. You smile, real this time, because the stories are small and therefore true. The war listens, jealous and patient. When it is your watch, you take it without thinking to resent. You sit on a log that has remembered how to be cold and rest the rifle across your lap. The swamp below the ridge glimmers in moonlight, a patchwork of black windows. From one, an owl lifts, a white punctuation mark in a sentence the forest writes every night, whether men are present or not. You envy the clarity of its flight. In the small hours, the temperature drops, and the mud crusts thinly. Frost writes its quiet runes along the track. You think, winter again, a rehearsal, a reminder. You think, the forest isn't choosing sides, only seasons. You think, perhaps endurance is a language the land speaks, and men occasionally pronounce correctly. Dawn comes as it always does here first, as a suggestion, then as a duty. The sky smudges to pearl. The trees separate from the night like ships slipping anchor. The men rise in stages, finding their feet the way you find a lost phrase. You warm your hands over the last heat and stir the ashes with a stick so the fire will not remember your name too well. Before you shoulder the pack, you look back down at the drowned trench, at the pond where a helmet drifted, at the places where maps became water and roads became advice. Spring is still everywhere, loud and impolite, but something has changed in the ledger you keep in your ribs. Winter tested, spring judged. You are still here. The men are still here. The forest is still itself. You take that as a verdict, not of innocence, not of guilt, but of permission. Forward, the lieutenant says, and it sounds less like a command than a continuation. You go. The ground holds enough. The trees rise like witnesses who have seen worse and expect better. Somewhere far off, the war clears its throat. Here, for this minute, the only sound that matters is the hush of your boots finding the next place that will accept their weight. You breathe. The air is cold and clean and full of rot and life in equal measure. It makes a kind of sense that needs no oath. You lift the rifle a little higher, glance once at Juka, feel the answer in his nod, and step into the day that waits wet, unholy, gasping and yours to cross without breaking. The first shells arrive before dawn, splitting the quiet sky in half. The sound doesn't echo, it devours. You wake with dirt in your mouth and a ringing in your ears that feels almost personal. The forest, once your shield, trembles as if the trees themselves are afraid. 1944, the year the world decides to burn again. You crawl to the edge of the trench and see the horizon flashing red. The Red Army has returned, larger, louder, endless. Planes hum like hornets above the clouds. Their bombs fall in rhythm, steady and cruel. The earth buckles. You press your face into the mud, praying the sky will run out of hate before the ground gives way. When the bombardment stops, the air is thick with dust and screams. Men stumble through smoke, faces pale, eyes hollow. Orders come and vanish in the roar of engines. You can taste the iron in the air. Somewhere behind the lines, someone shouts that Viapuri has fallen. Another voice insists, it's only a rumor. You don't correct him. Rumors are kinder than truth. The rumors scatter like ash in the wind, fragile and short-lived, replaced by the harsher sermon of artillery. You move, because movement is all that keeps you alive. Now one hand on the trench wall, boots slipping in mud, slick as grease. The ground shivers again as a shell lands somewhere behind you, and soil rains from the sky like a parody of snow. You taste cordite and fear. They stick to the tongue in the same way. A runner slides into the trench beside you, breath ragged, helmet dented. They've broken through near Tali, he gasps. Armored columns, fast ones, like wolves. His hands shake. Not from cold, the summer is warm, humid even, but fear makes its own weather. You nod, though the information feels distant, as if he's describing a war in another country, one where men are whole and the air isn't vibrating with the memory of explosions. Still, you move. You climb, you run, you brace your rifle against your shoulder. The forest is no longer quiet. Branches snap under the weight of retreat. Bark shakes loose from trunks, and somewhere to the east, men scream in Russian, Finnish, German, the languages blending into the universal grammar of panic. The first Soviet tanks appear on the ridge like angry gods forged from steel and will. Their engines growl. Their treads churn the earth into bleeding soil. You fire, because not firing would feel like surrender. The bullet hits armor, sparks, falls. It feels like throwing a pebble at the moon. Someone beside you lights a Molotov, hand trembling. The flame catches, reflected in his eyes with equal parts hope and resignation. He waits, counts breaths, and then runs forward. You don't watch him land the throw. You only hear it. Glass and fire and a roar that rolls through your ribs. When you look again, he's on the ground, still burning. The tank smolders too, but it keeps moving. So does he, briefly, before the flames claim what the shell didn't. You want to look away, but war forces you to witness even when witnessing hurts more than wounds. By mid-morning, you're falling back through pine stands, where the needles crunch underfoot like bones. Civilians clog the forest paths, old men pulling carts full of pots and blankets, women dragging goats on ropes, children clutching dolls that stare with wide, unblinking eyes. Their faces look carved, chiseled by fear and wind and time. A little girl stops you, touches your sleeve. Her fingers are small and surprisingly warm. "Will we go home?" she asks, voice hoarse from smoke. You don't answer immediately. There is no safe answer. Finally you kneel, just enough to see her eyes, and say, "We will go somewhere. Somewhere safe." She nods, not because she believes you, but because children have always been better at accepting hard truths than adults. Then she walks on, holding her mother's hand with the fragile firmness of someone gripping the last thread of a world disappearing behind her. Juka catches up to you, panting, sweat streaking his face through a mask of dust. "The road to Lapinranta is gone," he says. "Mud and metal and misery, all the same shape. Then we take the forest." You reply. He huffs a laugh, bitter and breathless. "We've been taking the forest for years. Eventually, it'll take us back." You don't argue. The truth has sharp teeth in months like this. The retreat melts into survival. You eat when someone remembers to cook. You drink from streams the color of rust because Thirst is an argument you can't win. You sleep in trenches that become graves and rise before dawn because dawn is the enemy's hour. War loses its shape. There is no line anymore. Only clusters of men clinging to pockets of ground like moss to stone. Command becomes rumor. Strategy becomes hope. And hope becomes something you ration like cigarettes. Small drags, careful breaths. One evening, the bombardment eases. The forest exhales, smoke through broken boughs. The sky glows orange, bruised by fire and dusk. You sit on a log, wiping your rifle with a rag that smells like gasoline and regret. Juka drops beside you, offering a canteen. It's just water this time, he promises. You sip. It's warm, metallic, but clean enough to feel like a gift. Think they'll come again tonight, you ask? They always come again, he answers. It's only a matter of whether we're still standing when they do. You watch ants crawling over your boot, tiny and relentless. We've fallen back before, you say. Not like this, he replies. Not with the world so sure of our ending. He isn't wrong. You feel it, the pressure of a fate closing in. Like the last pages of a book turning whether you're ready or not. Days pass. Lines crumble. The enemy doesn't march, it consumes. Bridges go up in flames. Villages become ash and cinder. Lakes churn with the smoke of burning boats. Somewhere, a church bell rings once, then stops forever. When the order finally comes to disengage, to pull back beyond all the places you marched into years ago, it feels like betrayal and relief in equal measure. You pack what you have left, which is mostly tools for enduring and memories you can't unload. You walk backward through the war, retracing pain like beads on a rosary. Crossing the WWII, you look back one last time. Smoke rises in columns. The land you fought for glows red and black. You try to picture it in winter white, silent, pure, but the images won't come. War has stained even memory. At the riverbank, an old soldier hands you a flag torn, muddy, edges burned. We didn't lose it, he says. We carried it as far as we could. You nod. Flags are heavy things, heavier when they survive. Then one strange morning, the shelling stops. The sky is normal blue, indifferent. Birds return, singing songs that don't match the landscape. You sit on a crate outside a warehouse filled with displaced families, and your hands shake. Not from fear, but from absence. A messenger arrives with a paper armistice terms. Words sharper than bullets. Territorial concessions, reparations, evacuation. You read each line slowly, as if the letters might bite. Finland remains bruised, smaller, wounded, but whole enough to speak its name. People around you exhale a sound like tired lungs discovering breath. Some cry, some laugh. Most just sit, stunned by the weight of surviving. Juka appears with a mug of something hot. Well, he mutters, we didn't die. You look at him. Not yet. He smirks, lifts the cup in a mock salute. Always the optimist. You take the mug, it burns your palms, it feels real, more real than victory or defeat. You drink. It tastes like bitter roots and wood smoke, like a beginning earned through endings. Later, when evening settles like dust over pine branches, you walk alone to the edge of camp and stand among the trees. The forest is quiet again, but not innocent. It remembers. It always will. You touch the scar on your wrist, barbed wire. Winter 1000. 942, and draw a slow breath. In the stillness, you understand. Wars don't end. They fade, slow as thaw, until memory becomes soil, and soil becomes silence. Tomorrow, you will help build again. Repair roofs, plant potatoes, teach yourself how to speak to people who don't carry rifles. But tonight, you stand in the hush between endings and beginnings. The sky dimming, the earth damp and alive beneath your boots. You survived. Not cleanly, not proudly, but truly. And in this small, battered country of lakes and pine and quiet stubbornness, survival is victory enough. The rumors scatter like ash in the wind, fragile and short-lived, replaced by the harsher sermon of artillery. You move, because movement is all that keeps you alive now, one hand on the trench wall. Boots slipping in mud, slick as grease. The ground shivers again as a shell lands somewhere behind you, and soil rains from the sky like a parody of snow. You taste cordite and fear. They stick to the tongue in the same way. A runner slides into the trench beside you, breath ragged, helmet dented. They've broken through near Tali, he gasps. Armored columns, fast ones, like wolves. His hands shake. Not from cold, the summer is warm, humid even, but fear makes its own weather. You nod, though the information feels distant, as if he's describing a war in another country, one where men are whole and the air isn't vibrating with the memory of explosions. Still, you move, you climb, you run, you brace your rifle against your shoulder. The forest is no longer quiet. Branches snap under the weight of retreat, bark shakes loose from trunks, and somewhere to the east men scream in Russian, Finnish, German, the languages blending into the universal grammar of panic. The first Soviet tanks appear on the ridge like angry gods forged from steel and will. Their engines growl. Their treads churn the earth into bleeding soil. You fire because not firing would feel like surrender. The bullet hits armor, sparks, falls. It feels like throwing a pebble at the moon. Someone beside you lights a Molotov, hand trembling. The flame catches, reflected in his eyes with equal parts hope and resignation. He waits, counts breaths, and then runs forward. You don't watch him land the throw. You only hear it. Glass and fire and a roar that rolls through your ribs. When you look again, he's on the ground, still burning. The tank smolders too, but it keeps moving. So does he briefly, before the flames claim what the shell didn't. You want to look away, but war forces you to witness, even when witnessing hurts more than wounds. By mid-morning, you're falling back through pine stands where the needles crunch underfoot like bones. Civilians clog the forest paths, old men pulling carts full of pots and blankets. Women dragging goats on ropes. Children clutching dolls that stare with wide, unblinking eyes. Their faces look carved, chiseled by fear and wind and time. A little girl stops you, touches your sleeve. Her fingers are small and surprisingly warm. "Will we go home?" she asks, voice hoarse from smoke. You don't answer immediately. There is no safe answer. Finally you kneel, just enough to see her eyes, and say, "We will go somewhere safe." She nods, not because she believes you, but because children have always been better at accepting hard truths than adults. Then she walks on, holding her mother's hand, with the fragile firmness of someone gripping the last thread of a world disappearing behind her. Juka catches up to you, panting, sweat streaking his face through a mask of dust. The road to La Penranta is gone, he says. Mud and metal and misery. All the same shape. Then we take the forest. You reply. He huffs a laugh, bitter and breathless. We've been taking the forest for years. Eventually, it'll take us back. You don't argue. The truth has sharp teeth in months like this. The retreat melts into survival. You eat when someone remembers to cook. You drink from streams the color of rust because thirst is an argument you can't win. You sleep in trenches that become graves and rise before dawn because dawn is the enemy's hour. War loses its shape. There is no line anymore. Only clusters of men clinging to pockets of ground like moss to stone. Command becomes rumor. Strategy becomes hope. And hope becomes something you ration like cigarettes. Small drags, careful breaths. One evening, the bombardment eases. The forest exhales smoke through broken boughs. The sky glows orange, bruised by fire and dusk. You sit on a log, wiping your rifle with a rag that smells like gasoline and regret. Juka drops beside you, offering a canteen. It's just water this time, he promises. You sip. It's warm, metallic, but clean enough to feel like a gift. Think they'll come again tonight, you ask? They always come again, he answers. It's only a matter of whether we're still standing when they do. You watch ants crawling over your boot, tiny and relentless. We've fallen back before, you say. Not like this, he replies. Not with the world so sure of our ending. He isn't wrong. You feel it, the pressure of a fate closing in. Like the last pages of a book turning whether you're ready or not. Days pass. Lines crumble. The enemy doesn't march, it consumes. Bridges go up in flames. Villages become ash and cinder. Lakes churn with the smoke of burning boats. Somewhere, a church bell rings once, then stops forever. When the order finally comes to disengage, to pull back beyond all the places you marched into years ago, it feels like betrayal and relief in equal measure. You pack what you have left, which is mostly tools for enduring and memories you can't unload. You walk backward through the war, retracing pain like beads on a rosary. Crossing the WWII, you look back one last time. Smoke rises in columns. The land you fought for glows red and black. You try to picture it in winter white, silent, pure, but the images won't come. War has stained even memory. At the riverbank, an old soldier hands you a flag torn, muddy, edges burned. We didn't lose it, he says. We carried it as far as we could. You nod. Flags are heavy things. Heavier when they survive. Then one strange morning, the shelling stops. The sky is normal blue, indifferent. Birds return, singing songs that don't match the landscape. You sit on a crate outside a warehouse filled with displaced families, and your hands shake, not from fear but from absence. A messenger arrives with a paper armistice terms, words sharper than bullets. Territorial concessions, reparations, evacuation. You read each line slowly as if the letters might bite. Finland remains bruised, smaller, wounded, but whole enough to speak its name. People around you exhale a sound like tired lungs, discovering breath. Some cry, some laugh, most just sit, stunned by the weight of surviving. Juka appears with a mug of something hot. Well, he mutters, we didn't die. You look at him. Not yet. He smirks, lifts the cup in a mock salute. Always the optimist. You take the mug. It burns your palms. It feels real. More real than victory or defeat. You drink. It tastes like bitter roots and wood smoke, like a beginning earned through endings. Later, when evening settles like dust over pine branches, you walk alone to the edge of camp and stand among the trees. The forest is quiet again, but not innocent. It remembers. It always will. You touch the scar on your wrist barbed wire. Winter 1942, and draw a slow breath. In the stillness you understand. Wars don't end. They fade, slow as thaw, until memory becomes soil, and soil becomes silence. Tomorrow, you will help build again, repair roofs, plant potatoes, teach yourself how to speak to people who don't carry rifles. But tonight, you stand in the hush between endings and beginnings, the sky dimming, the earth damp and alive beneath your boots. You survived, not cleanly, not proudly, but truly, and in this small, battered country of lakes and pine and quiet stubbornness, survival is victory enough. You sleep through the first night of peace, like a stone dropped into deep water, sinking, dreamless, unreachable. When you wake, the air smells of rain and wood smoke, and the sound of hammers carries faintly from the village below. It takes you a moment to remember that you're allowed to stand without ducking, that the distant thud is carpenters, not artillery. The camp is smaller each morning. Soldiers shed their uniforms for civilian coats, shave off beards, cut their hair, and vanish down the muddy road toward homes that may no longer exist. The war is over, and yet everything still looks like war-charred roofs, fences half collapsed, fields cratered by shells. It's as if the land hasn't heard the news. You and Juka walk into town. The sky is a color you can't name, something between smoke and forgiveness. In the square, an old man sweeps broken glass into a neat pile. He nods at you. You nod back. The gesture feels enormous. At the bakery, what's left of it, a woman sells bread that tastes faintly of sawdust. You buy a loaf anyway. Warm bread is an argument against despair, and it wins. The woman doesn't ask for payment. She only says, "Don't come back in uniform next time." You promise you won't, and for the first time in years you mean it. That afternoon, you help unload supplies from a wagon. Nails, timber, and rolls of tar paper that smell like oil and new beginnings. The work is clumsy. Your hands are used to rifles, not hammers. Every nail bends. Every board squeals. But the sound of rebuilding is better than silence. It's proof that something wants to live. As evening falls, Juka sits beside the riverbank, boots off, feet dangling above the water. "Strange, isn't it?" he says. "How the world keeps turning, no matter how hard we try to break it. You skip a stone. It hops twice before vanishing. Maybe it's the other way around, you say. Maybe it's the world that forgives us." He laughs softly. "Then it's kinder than we deserve." Oh. The next weeks blur into work. Roads are cleared. Graves are marked. Letters arrive from places that no longer have names. Every building smells of wet wood and paint. You live in the rhythm of repair. Saw, lift, hammer, breathe. The muscles that once carried death learn to carry timber instead. One day, a train arrives packed with refugees from Karelia. The land traded away again. They step onto the platform in silence, clutching boxes and blankets, eyes searching for something that isn't there. You help an old woman down, her legs trembling. "Where are we?" she asks. "Still Finland," you say. She nods slowly. Then it's enough. But when she walks away, she looks smaller. as if the border itself has taken something from her bones. That night, you sit by a small fire near the rail yard. A harmonica plays somewhere in the dark, a tune so fragile it could break if the wind turned wrong. You think of home, your real home, the one beyond the lost lakes, and realize you'll never see it again. Yet the thought doesn't crush you. It simply settles beside you, another ghost among many. By midsummer, the grass grows thick around the ruins. Children chase frogs between bomb craters. The river's clear. The smell of gunpowder fades, replaced by pine and the sweetness of sap. Life returns in small, cautious steps, as if testing the ground. You find work at a sawmill, cutting planks for the houses rising near the border. The rhythm is steady, hypnotic, wood against blade, sawdust against skin. Each board that slides off the bench feels like a confession accepted. Juka works beside you, humming tunelessly, occasionally pausing to light his pipe. "Do you ever miss it?" he asks one morning, wiping sweat from his brow. "The war?" "No, the certainty." "Ah, you think about that." The war had been hell, but it was simple. Live or don't. Build or break. Now the choices feel endless, and none of them heroic. Sometimes, you admit, but certainty is a kind of blindness. "I'll take confusion if it means I get to wake up." He grins. "You always did talk like a poet. Maybe you should write." You shake your head. The world doesn't need more words. It needs roofs. Hun. Still, that night, you find a scrap of paper and write anyway. The forest forgets nothing, but it lets us start again. You fold it and tuck it into your coat pocket. Not for others, just for proof that you were here, that you learned how to speak softly again. Autumn comes. Leaves turn gold, then brown, falling like old uniforms left behind. The war trials begin in Helsinki. People whisper about guilt and blame, but no one in the villages has the strength to hate anymore. Everyone lost something, and loss is the only language they still share. You visit the cemetery outside town. New crosses have joined the old, wooden ones for now, until the stone cutters catch up. You find the names of friends carved in careful, shaky letters. Juka lays a sprig of pine at one grave, then lights a cigarette. "They say the dead forgive," he murmurs. "But I don't think they have to. They'd understand." You nod. "They'd tell us to live faster, before winter finds us again." Ah! The wind shifts, carrying the smell of rain and wood smoke. You pull your coat tighter. It's the same coat you wore in the trenches, patched and repatched, the fabric thin over the heart. You keep it not from pride, but because it reminds you that survival isn't about perfection, it's about persistence. Winter returns quietly. No fanfare, no threat. Just the slow drift of snow over the ruins. The world becomes white again, as if trying to write a new chapter over the old one. You stand outside the rebuilt sawmill, watching the flakes fall through the light of the oil lamps. For the first time, the snow doesn't make you flinch. It feels clean. Inside, men tell stories, not about battles, but about the small things: the first loaf baked after the ovens were repaired, the cow that survived 3 winters, the baby born during a storm. The stories grow softer, rounder. War shrinks to the background noise of memory. One evening, Juka hands you a cup of coffee, real coffee, from some trade convoy that finally made it through. You take a sip, close your eyes, and almost taste peace. "Think it'll last?" he asks. You watch the snow fall heavier now, layering the roofs, filling the spaces between words. Nothing lasts, you say. But maybe that's all right. Maybe we're meant to keep rebuilding. He nods, quiet for a while, then grins. You still sound like a poet. You smile back. No, just someone who's tired. The fire pops. The men laugh at something you don't quite catch. And for a fleeting, perfect second, it feels like the war was just a rumor, a long, terrible story that the forest told once and then forgot. Outside, the snow keeps falling, soft as forgiveness, burying the scars one flake at a time. The world exhales. The night deepens. And you, scarred, exhausted, impossibly alive, stand beneath it all, watching the silence grow gentle again. By midsummer, the Red Army has taken everything south of the lakes. The government sends word, prepare to withdraw. You sit under a burned pine, reading the message written in a hand too neat for this kind of news. Hold what you can. Negotiate where you must. The men say nothing. You can see the question in their faces. What was it all for? The land, the frost, the dead. Did endurance mean anything if the map would simply shrink again? You think of home, of the woman who mended your coat by candlelight, of the boy who would be grown by now if he'd lived. You think of the snow, the long winter nights when you promised yourself this wouldn't happen again. But here it is, history, repeating itself. Louder, hungrier. When the order to fall back arrives, you do it with the precision of despair. You burn what you can't carry, dig graves you don't have time to mark. A single match turns a storehouse into a memory. Smoke hides tears better than pride does. By the time you reach the river, the sky has turned the color of old tin. The bridge is gone, blown by your own charges a week before, and the current is thick with blackened logs, broken wheels, something that might once have been a horse. You stand there for a long time, the message still folded in your coat pocket, as if waiting for someone to change their mind. But no one does. The world never does. You cross at dawn, boots slipping on the ice, the weight of the rifle dragging at your shoulder like guilt. On the far bank you count the men. Fewer than yesterday, fewer than the day before that. You stop counting after 12. In the village beyond the pines, the houses are hollowed, their windows blind. A child's sled leans against a wall, rope frayed to nothing. You tell the men to take only what they need, food, matches, fabric, and to leave the rest untouched. One of them finds a photograph in a drawer. A family at a summer table, the light golden, their faces blurred with joy. He folds it carefully and tucks it inside his jacket. You do not ask why. That night you sleep in the schoolhouse, on the floor where the desks once stood. The wind hums through the broken roof like a lullaby for the gone. You dream of the first snow of that first year, how clean it seemed, how sharp the air was, how certain you were that endurance could be its own kind of victory. You wake to the sound of coughing, of boots scraping frozen dirt. One of the men is gone, his blanket neatly folded, his rifle left behind. You say nothing. You've run out of words for leaving. The road north is a ribbon of ice and ash. Along it, burned convoys, wagons still smoldering, a horse frozen mid-gallop, the steam from its last breath turned to frost. You walk past it all. The silence grows thicker with each step, as though the earth itself is holding its breath, waiting for history to choose a side. At noon, you find a farmhouse still standing. Inside, it smells of apples and smoke. There's a kettle on the stove, long cold, a loaf of bread half cut. Someone left in a hurry, or simply vanished. On the table lies a book, a ledger maybe, but when you open it, the pages are filled with drawings, rivers, hills, the outlines of birds. None of it labeled. You tear out one page, a sketch of a lake under clouds, and keep it. You don't know why, only that it feels like a promise of something beyond this. You move again at dusk. The men walk slower now. One limps, one mutters to himself. One keeps touching the empty space where his brother used to march. You tell them you'll reach the northern line by morning, though you no longer believe it. The map is only paper after all, and paper burns. That night you find the body of a messenger. His satchel is full of letters, unopened, unsent. You read one by firelight, a woman writing to her husband. She says the harvest was good, that the bees have returned to the orchard, that the boy misses him. You fold it back, hands trembling, and toss it into the flames. You watch the ink curl into nothing. You tell yourself it's mercy. By the third day, frost has settled in your beard, in the folds of your coat. You taste iron in the air, like blood or memory. The forest opens into a valley, and there, across the plain, you see them, the enemy, if that word still means anything. Small figures against the white, moving like shadows in the snow. You could fire, you could call for the others, but you don't. You stand there, the rifle heavy in your hands, and you realize you no longer hate them. They are just shapes, cold and tired, walking toward their own orders, their own small graves. You lower the weapon. You walk the other way. When the sun rises, it's red, as if the sky itself remembers. You think of home again, not as a place, but as a moment. The smell of bread, the sound of rain on a tin roof, the way she looked at you before the door closed. You wonder if she would know you now, if she'd see through the soot and the silence to what's left inside. By evening, you reach a ridge overlooking what used to be your camp. Smoke still rises from it. You can see the lines where the tents once stood, the shallow pits of the fires, the footprints already fading under new snow. It looks almost peaceful from here, like the war was only ever a rumor. You sit, pull off your gloves, and light the last cigarette. The match flares, tiny, defiant, and for a second, the world feels alive again. Then it's gone. A sound behind you, the crunch of boots. You turn, half expecting an enemy patrol, but it's one of your men, the youngest. His face is pale, eyes hollow, hands trembling. He says nothing, just holds out a piece of paper. You take it. It's another message written in that same neat hand. Hold what you can. Negotiate where you must. You almost laugh. Instead, you tear it in half, then half again, until the pieces are small enough to scatter in the wind. You tell him to go. He hesitates. You nod once. He leaves. You listen to his steps fade into the distance, swallowed by snow and silence. You wait until you can't hear him anymore. Then you start walking too. The night comes fast, blue and endless. The trees grow sparse, their branches like bones. You see a light in the distance, a single lantern swaying. You follow it. Each step feels lighter, though you don't know why. Maybe it's the cold, maybe the fatigue, maybe something else entirely, a kind of surrender that feels almost like peace. When you reach the light, it's hanging outside a chapel half buried in snow. Inside, it's warmer. Candles still burn on the altar, their wax pooled and soft. You sit in the back pew, remove your cap, and close your eyes. For a moment there's no sound but the crackle of flame. You could almost believe in something again. You don't pray. You've forgotten the words, but you think them quietly into the wood and stone. Let it end. Not in victory, not in defeat, just end. Let the ground rest. Let the names fade. Let the snow fall without judgment. Outside, the storm begins. You watch it through the window flakes drifting down like slow ash. You think of the men still marching somewhere out there, their breath white, their boots breaking the crust of ice with every step. You think of the boy who folded the photo, the one who muttered to ghosts, the one who left before dawn. You hope they find warmth somewhere, even if it's only in memory. When the candles burn low, you rise. You take the rifle, sling it across your back, and step out into the storm. The wind erases your footprints as fast as you make them. The snow presses close, soft and endless. You walk until you can no longer tell where the sky ends and the ground begins. And somewhere in that white silence, you realize this is what endurance really means. Not victory, not survival, just the quiet act of continuing, one step after another, through the cold and the unknowing, until even the war forgets your name. You keep walking. The world keeps shrinking. The snow keeps falling. There is no sound now, no border, no message to carry. Only the soft hush of the storm, the pulse of your heart, and the distant memory of summer when the rivers were clear and the trees were green. And you believed, for a brief and foolish moment, that history could be outwalked. You smile barely. You keep going. Because what else is there to do? You don't remember when the shooting stopped. Maybe it was gradual, a day without thunder, a night when no flares rose. Maybe it ended while you slept, your dreams still filled with the noise of it. When you woke, the silence felt heavier than the war itself. You walk through the old lines. The trenches are shallow now, half filled with snow, half filled with memory. You find helmets turned into bowls for melting ice, a spoon frozen in mud, a boot with no foot inside. You pick nothing up. You've learned that even relics can bite. The men have gone, some home, some nowhere. You don't ask which. Home is just another word for what you've lost. The radio crackles sometimes with words like armistice, reconstruction, victory. They sound smaller than you remember. You climb the ridge one last time. From here, the forest looks endless, white and unbroken. You know it isn't. Beneath the snow lie the camps, the graves, the ruins. The frost has covered everything, but not erased it. You can feel it under your boots, a heartbeat deep in the frozen soil. The past, still breathing. Someone once said the land remembers what men forget. You think they were right? Now the war is over, or so they say. The flags rise again, clean and new, as if color could cure what time cannot. You stand among them, unarmed, watching smoke drift from the last fires. It smells of pine and ash, the scent of both ending and beginning. The world writes its history in headlines, in marble, in parades. But you know history lives elsewhere, in the quiet places, in the hollows where no one looks, in the lakes that still mirror the faces of the dead, in the forests that whisper at night, the snow carrying secrets from one tree to another. You walk into that silence. It greets you like an old friend, changed, but familiar. The air bites, but it no longer feels cruel. The cold has become something like truth, sharp, simple, absolute. Finland stands free, they tell you. But freedom, you've learned, is not the same as peace. Peace is harder. Peace means remembering. You reach the clearing where the last fire burned. Only one pine remains blackened at the edges, its roots sunk deep into the frozen earth. You rest your hand against its bark. It's warm from the sun, faintly alive. Beneath it, the ground is soft, red where the snow has melted. You close your eyes. You listen. The wind moves through the branches, slow and low, like breath. You think, perhaps, this is what remains when history is done speaking, not triumph, not despair, just the quiet hum of a world that survived itself. And as the light fades, you let the silence take you. The forest breathes. The snow falls. You stay there, between fire and frost, listening to the endless hush over the frozen pines. Now rest. Let the snow cover what memory cannot. Let the wind smooth the edges of all that was lost. You've walked far enough for one lifetime. Somewhere, a river still runs beneath the ice. Somewhere the dawn will come soft and pale, and no one will be shooting. Close your eyes. The world will keep turning without you for a while. The frost will hold. The silence will keep. Good night, traveler. Sleep and let the pines stand watch.